right, guys, today we're talking about four wrestlers that Jimmy absolutely couldn't stand, and the reasons are all over the place. From getting fired to some pretty wild backstage drama, this one's going to be crazy. So let's not waste any time and jump right into it. 1. Jerry Lawler. Jimmy Hart's rivalry with Jerry the King, Lawler wasn't just another wrestling feud, it was the feud that launched Jimmy's entire career. Long before Hart became the mouth of the South and strutted around with megaphones in the WWF, he was in Memphis going head-to-head with the man who ruled the territory, Jerry Lawler. And this wasn't some friendly competition. This was personal, fiery, and downright chaotic. It all began in the late 1970s when Jimmy Hart was still trying to make a name for himself. Back then, Lawler was the face of Memphis wrestling, the local hero, the man fans adored. Hart started out as part of Lawler's entourage, serving more as a sidekick than a rival. But things didn't stay peaceful for long. When Lawler got injured and was forced to take time off, Jimmy saw an opening. He turned on Lawler and began building his own army of wrestlers, calling them the First Family. Their entire mission? Destroy Jerry Lawler's legacy and take over Memphis wrestling once and for all. Hart became the ultimate thorn in Lawler's side. Every week on Memphis TV, Hart would bring out a new challenger. Austin Idol, Ken Patera, King Kong Bundy, whoever he could find. All with one goal: humiliate the king. The feud quickly became the heartbeat of the Memphis territory. Fans would tune in week after week just to see if Lawler could finally get his hands on Hart or one of his goons. But what made this rivalry truly special was how real it felt. Jimmy Hart wasn't a big guy or a trained wrestler, but his mouth made him dangerous. He'd insult Lawler relentlessly, shouting over the crowd, waving his arms and taunting him like a gnat that wouldn't go away. And Lawler, being the fiery performer he was, played right into it. Their chemistry was off the charts. Jimmy was the perfect cowardly villain, and Lawler was the perfect hero. One of the most famous moments came when Lawler gave Hart his now iconic nickname, the Wimp. During a heated segment, Lawler mockingly called him Jimmy the Wimp Hart, and the crowd exploded with laughter. Instead of getting rid of it, Hart leaned into it, using the insult to make fans hate him even more. It was classic wrestling storytelling, and it worked perfectly. The rivalry stretched for years. Even when Lawler and Hart weren't directly feuding, their paths would cross again and again. Hart's First Family constantly interfered in Lawler's matches, throwing fireballs, attacking him backstage, and causing chaos. The fans couldn't wait to see Lawler finally get revenge, and when he did, the arena would erupt like a volcano. 2. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman wasn't your typical wrestler. He was a Hollywood comedian, best known for his quirky roles on TV shows like Taxi and his strange, unpredictable humor. But Andy loved wrestling, not just as entertainment, but as an art form. He saw it as a stage where reality and fiction could collide. So when he reached out to promoters around the country offering to do a wrestling angle, most of them laughed him off. But in Memphis, Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Hart saw potential. This wasn't just a celebrity cameo. This was a chance to create something unforgettable. Jimmy Hart was managing in Memphis at the time, already making waves with his First Family stable. When Kaufman came into the picture, Hart quickly jumped on board, seeing an opportunity to bring even more attention to the Memphis territory. Kaufman started performing an act where he declared himself the intergender wrestling champion, challenging women from the audience to wrestle him. He'd taunt them, brag about being stronger and smarter than women, and then pin them in the ring while shouting, "I'm from Hollywood." The crowd hated him, and that was exactly the point. Lawler, who was always the hometown hero, took offense to Kaufman's antics. He saw him as an outsider disrespecting wrestling and the fans who loved it. Jimmy Hart, of course, fueled the fire, constantly mocking Lawler and hyping up Kaufman as this big-time Hollywood star who could humiliate the king. The tension built for weeks until Lawler finally stepped in and said he'd had enough. He challenged Kaufman to step into the ring with him. Not a woman, not a comedian, but a real wrestler. When they finally faced off, it became one of the most famous moments in wrestling history. Lawler gave Kaufman a massive pile driver that left him motionless in the ring. The audience went crazy. Kaufman was taken away on a stretcher, wearing a neck brace that he continued to wear for months afterward, even during TV interviews. The feud looked so real that people across the country thought Lawler had legitimately injured Kaufman. Things got even crazier when the two appeared together on Late Night with David Letterman in 1982. Kaufman started taunting Lawler live on air, throwing insults until Lawler finally snapped and slapped him across the face on national television. The slap became an instant media sensation, with newspapers and talk shows debating whether it was real or staged. Meanwhile, Jimmy Hart kept playing his role perfectly, going on local Memphis TV and claiming that Lawler had attacked a Hollywood celebrity out of jealousy. For Jimmy Hart, this feud was pure gold. It gave him mainstream exposure far beyond the wrestling world. For Lawler, it solidified his reputation as a serious competitor who could stand toe-to-toe with anyone, even a celebrity. And for Kaufman, it was the ultimate performance, a blend of comedy, drama, and real physical risk that perfectly fit his unpredictable personality. 3. The Hart Foundation. The story between Jimmy Hart and the Hart Foundation is one of betrayal, pride, and payback, and it became one of the most entertaining rivalries of the 1980s. What makes this feud so special is how personal it felt. Jimmy Hart wasn't just managing another tag team, he helped create the Hart Foundation. He gave them guidance, confidence, and his trademark megaphone energy. But when they turned their backs on him, Jimmy took it personally, and he made it his mission to destroy them every chance he got. It all began in the mid-1980s when Jimmy Hart was one of the most active managers in the WWF. Known as the Mouth of the South, he managed a stable of villains, each one louder and more colorful than the last. Among them was a new tag team made up of Bret, the Hitman Hart, and Jim the Anvil, Neidhart. Together, they formed the Hart Foundation, a mix of brains and brute strength. Bret was the technician, precise and skilled, while Neidhart was the powerhouse, wild and unpredictable. And right there at ringside was Jimmy Hart, screaming into his megaphone, helping them cheat, distract referees, and steal victories. Under Jimmy's management, the Hart Foundation rose to the top of the tag team division. They became WWF Tag Team Champions, and Jimmy proudly took credit for their success. He was always front and center, bragging about his boys, taking the spotlight, and reminding the world that without him, they'd be nothing. At first it worked. The combination of Jimmy's mouth and the team's talent made them one of the most hated acts in the company. But as time went on, things started to change. Bret Hart began getting more popular with the fans. His skill and attitude started earning respect, even though he was still technically a bad guy. Neidhart followed his partner's lead, and before long the team began drifting away from Jimmy Hart's sneaky tactics. The final straw came when the Hart Foundation decided they'd had enough of being villains. They turned face, becoming fan favorites. And in doing so, they fired Jimmy Hart as their manager. That didn't sit well with Jimmy at all. He felt betrayed. He claimed that he was the one who made them stars. And now they were turning their backs on him after all his hard work. From that moment on, the feud was on. Jimmy swore revenge, and he did it in the most Jimmy Hart way possible, by managing every single tag team that challenged the Hart Foundation. He brought in teams like the Honky Tonk Man and Greg the Hammer Valentine, the Fabulous Rougeaus, and the Nasty Boys, all in hopes of taking the tag titles away from Bret and Neidhart. Each time the Hart Foundation defended their titles, there was Jimmy Hart in the corner of the opposing team, yelling through his megaphone, causing distractions, and doing whatever he could to cost his former team the gold. This ongoing war lasted for years and became one of the most consistent storylines in WWF's tag team division. Every time Jimmy showed up with a new team, fans knew what his real motivation was. He wasn't managing them out of loyalty or belief. He was managing them to hurt the Hart Foundation. It was revenge, plain and simple. In the end, the Hart Foundation outlasted most of Jimmy's teams and solidified themselves as one of the greatest tag teams of all time. But Jimmy's vendetta made their journey even more memorable. The constant interference, the betrayals, the mind games, all of it kept fans invested. 4. Jake Roberts. It all started with one of Jimmy's prized wrestlers, the Honky Tonk Man, and ended with one of the most shocking moments in WrestleMania history. At the time, Jimmy Hart was managing the Honky Tonk Man, a flashy Elvis-inspired performer who strutted around the ring with his guitar and arrogance turned up to 11. Honky was everything fans loved to hate, loud, cocky, and backed up by the ever-annoying voice of Jimmy Hart. Together, they were an unstoppable duo until they crossed paths with Jake the Snake Roberts. Jake Roberts was a completely different kind of wrestler. He didn't yell or brag like most villains or heroes of that era. Instead, he was calm, cold, and menacing. His words were slow and chilling, his actions methodical. He'd terrify opponents not with shouting, but with silence. And of course, his live snake, Damien, which he carried in a bag everywhere he went. Naturally, this clash of styles made for great TV. Honky Tonk's over-the-top personality versus Jake's quiet, dangerous energy. The tension between the two started building in 1987. Jimmy Hart, always looking for attention, would run his mouth about how Honky Tonk was the true star of the WWF, mocking Jake Roberts at every opportunity. Eventually, it boiled over into a match where Honky Tonk Man brutally attacked Jake with his guitar, smashing it over his head. What fans didn't know at the time was that Jake was legitimately injured from that shot, suffering a real concussion and neck issues that plagued him for months. But being the performer he was, Jake turned the real pain into part of the storyline, vowing revenge on Honky and his loudmouth manager, Jimmy Hart. Their feud reached its peak at WrestleMania III in 1987, one of the biggest shows in wrestling history. On one side stood Jake Roberts, with rock legend Alice Cooper in his corner. On the other side were the Honky Tonk Man and Jimmy Hart, strutting to the ring with confidence. The crowd was electric, waiting to see Jake finally get payback for that brutal guitar attack. During the match, Jimmy Hart did what he always did best: interfere and distract. Every time Jake started to gain momentum, Jimmy would climb onto the ring apron, waving his megaphone and shouting insults. In the end, Honky Tonk Man managed to steal the win, with Jimmy's help, infuriating the fans. But the real highlight came after the match, when Jake and Alice Cooper decided to get even in a way no one would forget. As Jimmy Hart tried to run away, Jake cornered him in the ring, while Alice Cooper reached into Jake's signature bag, and out came Damien, the live snake. The crowd went absolutely wild. Jimmy screamed, running in circles, trying to escape as Alice and Jake closed in, holding the giant python out toward him. It was one of those over-the-top wrestling moments that instantly became iconic. The cowardly manager getting his comeuppance in the most terrifying way possible. That single moment defined Jimmy's feud with Jake Roberts. It showed exactly who Jimmy was as a character. A loud, sneaky manager who always ran his mouth, but ran even faster when the tables turned. And Jake Roberts played his part perfectly. Calm, calculating, and more than willing to let Damien do the talking for him. And that wraps up today's video, guys. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss any of our future updates. See you next time. Bye.